Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and as always, I'm joined on this constitutional special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program by my first officer, Jeremy Gravenden. Folks, I know it's been quite a little while since we've done our last constitutional special edition. Nevertheless, it is important that we touch upon some pressing topics that have come to light, particularly with respect to recent events. As you are all aware, today the FBI came out and announced that it was not going to do anything to Hillary Rotten Clinton for violating the law. Again, it's showing that they are trying to carve out a separate and apart niche for Hillary and for people like Donaldolph Julius Caesar Trumpolini. Nevertheless, what is important is that we focus on due process and equal protection under the law. These two quintessential aspects of our shared United States Constitution are non-negotiable. Yet we see that the ruling elites, the powers that be, are going to continue to try and strip and deprive the decent, law-abiding, red-blooded American citizens of their fundamental and inalienable God-given right to equal protection under the law and due process. Why is this so important? Well, it's as the old adage goes, the United States of America is a nation of laws, not of men, meaning that the laws apply to us equally and that before any fundamental and inalienable right may be taken away, besmirched, belittled, or removed from the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, it must be done with notice and a hearing, an actual judicial hearing. What's so shocking about recent events, though, is if you recall that West Virginia Senator Joe Munchkin and his little frothing of the mouth gerbil playboy over there in Connecticut with Chris Murphy, they went in front of the cameras of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media to lament that American citizens have a due process right. They didn't like the fact that we are able to say that no, before you can strip and deprive us of our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, you must actually provide us with notice and a hearing. It must be adjudicated that we have somehow violated the sovereign rights of another individual popular sovereign. But that's not what they do. They sit there and they say that due process is killing us. And then we see that they want to say that there is a separate set of laws that applies to her royal hind ass, Hillary Rotten Clinton. Really, folks, what came down today was a ruling that essentially casts aside due process and equal protection under the law. They were attempting to say, Comey there with the FBI was essentially attempting to say that yes, there is all of this evidence, the great weight of the evidence shows she's guilty, but we're not going to do anything. Of course, Jeremy and I have oft-times warned on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence the Wright Flyer that this would be the direct result and outcome. There can be no question that they would do this with Hillary Clinton. Why? Because corruption is running rampant in the halls of government. We certainly see that with respect to the bizarre ascendancy of Donald Trump. The titular faces of the same coin are here. They are showing that our entire system has been perverted by the twisted and dark machinations of the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist.
You know, Randy, I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties here. I'm not sure if it's on my end or if it's on your end or if it's on both of our ends. But it's we're looking at how the court is kind of behaving in a way of them being afraid of doing the right thing. They're with this election cycle, they don't know who is, or rather they're putting up the facade that they don't know who's going to win the election. But it's as if they're behaving in such a fashion to where they're walking on eggshells. They don't want to make a ruling that is legitimate because it'll disrupt their cushy little seats. As if to say that, well, we don't want to disrupt the boat and rock the boat with this and that. We don't want to follow the Constitution because, well, we don't know who's going to be elected, so we don't know if our job is going to be secure anymore if we do this. Since when has the American spirit of doing the right thing and following the Constitution ever been used as a of doing the wrong thing?
Well, it never should have been. It never should have been. And what we see that's happening
They're
is
showing themselves to become afraid.
We have a lot of problems with respect to the way that power is just being arbitrarily abused. And a lot of that abuse is coming from these unconstitutional organizations. Again, it has to go back to this notion that we're focusing on here of due process and equal protection under the law. We see that those two elements are quintessential aspects of our national identity. And the way that you can really start to parse that out is if you look at the way that due process is there to prevent the government from taking such ardent strides against what we hold near and dear as a nation and a people, we see that it comes down to they don't want to have to be held accountable whenever they're trying to take away a fundamental and inalienable God-given right. We the people are the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty. That is one of the most important things that we need to take away from the formation of our representative republic. If we get away from this whole notion that the people are the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty, that's when you can start to whittle away the rights. And it also brings in the Ninth Amendment. The way that these frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are trying to use certain aspects of the Constitution and certain laws that have been passed to try and tear down the Constitution. That is a direct violation of the Ninth Amendment. And with respect to due process and also equal protection, we see that the Ninth Amendment also means that there is not one right that should be held or lauded against any other right in the Constitution. They are all to be given the same weight.
Sure. And what I'm looking at with these rulings pertaining to due process, it's like Comey, as you mentioned, says, well, we have all the evidence and this and that, but, that's the extent of it. We're not going to move forward with charges. It's almost like they're taking the evidentiary aspect of it and saying, well, that's the extent of due process. There's no more due process needed to be done. We've gone through and applied due process because we've collected the evidence, we've looked at it, and we decided, it's not going to happen. That's a cop-out, is what it is. That is not complete due process. Due process is from the very beginning of the crime happening all the way through to the complete adjudication of the crime and even the sentencing being carried out, as well as the punishment, all the way till the end, until the person is, to use a prison term or a correction term used by inmates, until that person is off paper.
Right.
So they're doing this in a haphazard way of applying this, and that is the problem of why our legal system is in such disarray, because they only want to apply what fits for their agenda.
And it's been that way for such a long time now, because they think that they can just get away with anything. When you start to sell out your principles, when you start to just allow anyone to get away with anything, much like what we saw was happening with respect to Hillary Clinton today, and when the FBI director blatantly stated in front of the cameras of the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media that there was no way that we were going to hold her accountable, because if this were any other case, sure, we would go about in enforcing the law. If this were any other case or any other individual, then it would have been moved forward with. Think back to General Petraeus and how they went after him.
Scooter Libby.
Right. It shows that there is a selective enforcement here. And it's by, what, color of title, color of birth with respect to Hillary Rotten Clinton and who she is and whom she was married to or is married to? That That is diametrically opposed to the fundamental tenets that form the bedrock basis of our shared Constitution, but also our representative Republican form of government. And the fact that we are even having to discuss it in such a manner truly demonstrates the problems that we are having as a nation. And I've even had a dear friend of mine come out and try and say that sometime within the next decade that the Constitution itself is just going to disappear. But I don't believe that to be the case. The reason I don't believe that to be the case is if we look deep in the hearts, souls, and minds of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people, then there will be such an uprising against such a maneuver that it just would not come to fruition. Because the American people do value this notion that the United States of America is a nation of laws and not of men. But that means, as we have oft-times reiterated on past episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that we have to be proactive in the maintenance and safeguarding of our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. That's not something that we can just walk away from. That's not a mere suggestion. That's not something that we can just say, oh, on Sunday we'll do it, but not through the rest of the week. No, this is a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week, 365-day-a-year duty, obligation, and above all, responsibility that is wielded by the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. And it's something we must always keep in mind. We must be vigilant because these forces are out to take them away. And we see that they also try and pervert things like the Due Process Clause. You know, there are two different types, at least in the legal parlance, that they try and use. Procedural due process is the notice and the hearing. But then we see that with cases like Griswold v. Connecticut and then Roe v. Wade, we see that they try and use some sort of thing called the substantive due process clause to find rights in what Justice Douglas referred to as the penumbras or the shadows of the Constitution. No, that is going above and beyond the clear and concise language of the Constitution. Your rights are found within the first 10 amendments. Anything that is not addressed within that or addressed at any other part of the Constitution is reserved to the states and the people respectfully and respectively.
Yeah.
That's how it has to be.
And I've had conversations with individuals when they say, well, you know, marriage is a right. Okay, show me where in the Constitution lists marriage as a right. You know, same-sex marriage. And I take it a step further and say, show me anywhere in the Constitution where marriage as a whole, whether it's same-sex marriage, heterosexual marriage, marrying your pickup truck or your favorite head of sheep from your herd. It's not there. But I've been able to show people exactly why it's not there. They said, well, we have the right to do... No. Now, there are certain things that aren't specifically enumerated within the Constitution, but they fall under the purview of things that are enumerated, like the right to property. People say, well, you don't have a right to have a cell phone. Well, technically you do, because
that's personal property.
It's personal property. They said, well, then marriage would apply because, you know, you have the right to be secure in your papers, persons, and effects. So that's where marriage comes in. Wrong. Because, see, the papers referring to marriage are the marriage licenses. And licenses are something that are issued by the state governing body, which means they could be revoked. So if something can be given and taken away, it's not a right. At best, it's a quasi-privilege. At best.
And actually, the reason why that was not addressed in the Constitution was because the state governments predated the creation of the Constitution.
Yes.
And it's already given a near right-like status by the state governments. The licensure is just there to ensure that you're not engaging in incest, that you're not engaging in rape, that sort of thing. That was what it was originally designed to accomplish. But it was never meant to be that you could limit the ability to marry. That was considered a fundamental part of the basic building block of society, but it was not the prerequisite or the prerogative of the federal government. Again, it goes back to that whole natural law tenet that applies to our Constitution, the natural order of things, with the family being the fundamental building block of society. That is your first step of government. So yes, there is a bit of a license there, but it goes to show that they cannot prevent you from living together.
Right.
That would be going beyond it. But to have the legal status of marriage, no, that is considered a rite of passage, not a right per se.
Correct. And with that translates right into, again, them construing or interpreting the 10th Amendment to mean something completely opposite of what the intentions were with it. And even going back to the due process, there's due process there regarding marriage. You have to go through certain legalities, with the licensing and so on and so forth. It's exercising of a privilege. Again, it's a quasi-privilege, but it's a privilege nonetheless. What people don't understand is they're saying, well, you're denying my right. Well, no, you're not being denied the right to marry anybody. You can marry anybody you want to, just so long as both parties are in agreement. However, they're wanting to take it to the step further, saying, well, I want to marry this person of the same sex. Marriage comes back to, like you said, the natural tenet under natural law. The way it was originally intended is between a man and a woman for the purposes of procreation and establishing a family unit. How can a family unit and procreation exist if there's two individuals that aren't capable of procreating together?
And it's interesting because a lot of the left-wingers will try and come back and say that, well, then are you saying that if you are a heterosexual couple that are incapable of procreating that you shouldn't be married? No. No. What it goes to is the purpose of having marriage was originally for that, but that's not the only reason marriage exists.
Sure.
No one's saying that they shouldn't be able to have, say, like a civil union. That they can have that all they want. The states are perfectly able of creating that. But to say that it's the same thing as marriage, to then demand that the government be used to force certain companies and private institutions and entities to provide services for something that they disagree with on a moral basis, that is crossing over into a different kind of territory. That is thereby trying to use the law to infringe upon the rights of another. Remember, what we've always said here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, is that our rights end where another sovereign individual rights begin. And that is a sacrosanct notion that is an integral part of the way that our federalist representative Republican form of government is meant to work. We cannot turn our backs on that, and we cannot ignore that that is an integral part of who we are. It's part of the whole reason why on, basically yesterday, 240 years ago, our founding fathers in their infinite wisdom and foresight sat down and said, hey, you know what? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain fundamental and unalienable rights, and that chief among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
But they want to also make the argument that in the case of where we see the Colorado bakeries that were forced to bake a wedding cake for a same-sex couple, they want to say, well, see, we're allowing due process to take place.
But it's not true due process. It's a violation of the 9th Amendment.
Right, because what they're doing, again, is they're taking it, they're bastardizing it, and applying it to their own agenda. Why? For appeasement. They want to appease these individuals for the sole purpose of keeping them on the hook for votes, for what it boils down to is pure amusement by these hell spawns of Satan, the Fabians, because the more people they can keep on the hook for their agenda, that's how they gain their power. Okay, the more people they have that will capitulate to them, that will follow their agenda, that will actually go out and preach and propagandize things on their behalf, that makes it easier for them to do other things behind the scenes, come up with more ideas and ways of destroying our country, our republic, our constitution, and ultimately we the people with our sovereignty. Two, it opens up the doors for all of these other aspects to be challenged in the court, which further emboldens and bolsters their first part of agenda. It's a cyclical attack is what it is. They set things up to where certain events transpire, and then they use the results of those events to just keep the wheel going.
And it's all part of a diabolical scheme. It's all part of a centralized agenda. And their narrative and agenda has always been about destroying that which came before. If you look at any left-wing ideology or philosophy, you'll start to see that everywhere you turn in the globe that they have gone in, they are always at war with the system that existed or predated them. Mm-hmm. And the reason they do that is they know that they cannot compete in the marketplace of ideas. They know that when you look at it with true logic and reason, you find that it's totally wanting in all impetus and importance, because it's not backed by anything other than greed. And that's why they play these dirty and twisted games of semantics that we have warned about, going back to our first episode, which aired on September 11th of 2015, about semantics. They use due process against itself. They use the Constitution against itself. It all ties back into what Roger Nash Baldwin, the founder of the American Civil Liberties Union, said, that they would use the Constitution to destroy the Constitution. That is their goal. That is what they have been working towards for well over a century now, and it also explains why they think that by using incrementalization that they can carve out a special niche for themselves to create two separate applicable codes of law in this country, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. Because when you consider that the United States of America is a nation of laws and not of men, that means that there can only be one law that applies across the board equally to everyone, irrespective of who they are, or what title they hold, or what governmental position they hold. We have got to get back to that.
And we have to make a stand when it comes to individuals like Comey not wanting to fulfill his obligations of the sworn duty. You know, where does it stop there? I mean, he's basically in, and I'm rather insulted by him when he says, well, you know, we're not going to do it of this caliber, we don't see anything, but, you know, if it would have been anybody else, sure, we would have pressed forward with it. See, to me, it's not so much looking at it as Hillary having a certain social status as far as who she was married to, or because she's a presidential candidate, or anything else. What it is, ultimately, is what they're doing, is they're creating a title of nobility for themselves and for other individuals within their circle.
Well, guess what you just described there, with not who she's married to or what, that's exactly what nobility is.
Yes. And that is strictly prohibited in the Constitution. Now, when they do this, and they're willing to violate that part of the Constitution, of course they're going to violate every other aspect, because any violation of the Constitution, or any section or article or amendment of the Constitution, is a violation of the Constitution on the whole, because it is the supreme law of the land. Article 6, Clause 2. You violate one aspect of the Constitution, one passage, you're violating the entire document, and you're violating the entire system of law. So
And
when
that's why they hate the Constitution. They hate the Constitution because it limits their ability to try and do power grabs. They hate the Constitution because of the power it affords the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. And that's been what their twisted design has been for the past century and a half. But then for people to come out and attack Ted Cruz when he had a statement basically saying that we are seeing the death of the rule of law, and there were a bunch of comments on Facebook and various other social media sites and outlets where people were saying, well, then why aren't you doing anything about it, Cruz? Why aren't you standing up and doing anything for it? Why don't you support Trump? A lot of these people that are sitting there saying he's not doing anything don't understand that in the Constitution, one individual, one person, one entity, and certainly one branch of government should not, cannot, will never be able to fundamentally transform the nation or act in such a way as to have what happens happen. And so what they're basically asking for is Cruz to take what? Dictatorial powers unto himself? He cannot do it alone. But they don't seem to care. They seem to think that he should just basically buck up, shut up, and take full control. Cruz won't do that because he's a man of principle.
well,
And that does not make him establishment or weak. It means that we should not give up our representative Republican form of government.
Yeah, and the other thing that they're implying there is that if Cruz doesn't just basically toe the line, then he's useless. It's catch-22 with him. They want him to stand up and do this, which, by the way, folks, he has. Mm-hmm. He has represented we the people in the Supreme Court numerous times and has won. An individual can only do so much within their capabilities before the burden becomes too heavy. It becomes too heavy for them to carry alone. And this is the other part of being an ultimate wielder of popular sovereignty. It's not just about each one of us individually. That's a certain aspect of it. But the individualism has to transubstantiate into from being an individual person, a single person, to a republic of people. We have to come together and have individualism. Our nation has to be rooted in individualism. Our nation as a whole has to become the ultimate wielder of popular sovereignty. That's what it's designed, and it starts with we the people. They want to take incrementalization and use it to destroy these things. Let's take incrementalization with incrementally instituting these actions by ourselves first, individually, to the extreme of our means, but also doing it together. And that's what makes our republic so strong. That is what made America great to begin with, or one of the very rooted aspects of it. And if we don't do that, and we continue to try and point to individuals and say, well, you have these credentials, why don't you do something? Again, it falls back to that mentality of wanting somebody else to save you, instead of you taking the onus and the responsibility of first saving yourself.
Right. And it comes down to another aspect of what these frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists always try and do. You notice that they've been waging war on this idea of being accountable, self-accountable, to be responsible for one's actions. That's why they don't want to call felons felons anymore. Mm-hmm. Well, when you do that, you start to chip away at the meaning of law. And as we were saying, the United States of America is and should always be a nation of laws, not of men. That means that the nation stands for something greater than we ourselves, either as an individual or as even a group, because it needs to be handed down to posterity. It needs to be something more permanent, more stable, more lasting, more impactful. And the reason that our Constitution is the longest running constitutional document in the course of human events is because it's based on this idea of due process and equal protection under the law. Mm-hmm. Because if you're going to have sovereignty in the hands of the people, you cannot have government just run ramshod over their fundamental and inalienable rights, particularly when those rights are written on our hearts, because that's the way the natural law tenets are supposed to work. Now, granted, the Fabian socialists are going to sit there and say that's a bunch of poppycock, but the truth remains that that is the quintessential part of who we are, both as a nation and as a people. And when we divorce ourselves from that, and when we allow the government to become rogue, tyrannical, and illegitimate, that's when we start to have the problems that we're seeing now. That's when you start to see this departure from sanity and basically going into the twilight zone of totalitarianism. And we are dangerously close to crossing that precipice, folks. Dangerously close.
You mentioned the realm of sanity. See, there's actually, it's become the realm of insanity, because these individuals that are doing this, the ones that are dictating to other individuals, well, if you don't vote for Trump, then, it's an automatic vote for Hillary. Or if you don't do this, you don't do that. Or if you don't support Hillary, or if you don't, whatever the case is. Basically what they're saying is, if you don't do anything other than follow the Constitution, then you're useless. You're part of the problem. This is the issue that has come down to where it's obvious that our country is suffering very extensively. It's like we have a sucking chest wound. Okay? And that chest wound is, we've gone away from the notion of, if you don't follow the Constitution, you're part of the problem. Now, if it's as if you don't oppose the Constitution, you're part of the problem. And that is insane. Because those individuals that are perpetuating this nonsensical drivel, they're doing that towards individuals like you and me, our First Air Marshal Nelson Ward, our first-class passengers and cherished listeners. But they're doing it because they expect us to change our minds, which will never happen. So it's an exercise of futility with them. That is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. These individuals are absolutely clinically insane. Absolutely are. Now, they'll say, well, on the other side is, you guys are all for the Constitution, and you're saying if we don't follow the Constitution, you're expecting us to change our minds. Well, here's the caveat to that. We have changed people's minds. So, we have actually gotten the desired result over and over and over. We have gotten different results over and over by doing the same things. So are we insane? Absolutely not. We do not fit the clinical definition of insanity.
We're pragmatic. Yeah. It has to be with realism. We have to face reality. And the reality is, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. It's there in the clear and concise language within its four corners. Article 6, Clause 2. As we've mentioned in this episode already, and as we've oftentimes mentioned in previous episodes, makes the Constitution the supreme law of the land. Therefore, anything that goes into the contrary, or contradicts the clear and concise language of the Constitution, is violative of the supreme law of the land. And of course, that also goes down the lines of the topic du jour tonight, that of due process and equal protection under the law. When you start to take away due process, what you're then allowing to happen are scenarios where you can have people just dragged off in the middle of the night. You wouldn't need to have warrants. You wouldn't need to have anything, because that ties into all of it. It shows once again that the entire Constitution needs to be read in its totality, and that you can't just pick and choose parts of it. But when you allow secret rulings, secret courts, secret things, or you allow the law to apply only to a certain segment of the population, you are then creating chaos. You are allowing anarchy to reign supreme. And when we become a nation of men, it devalues everything that this nation has always stood for and represented, because that means that the Constitution suddenly becomes a quote-unquote living document. Because if it's a nation of men, that means that the Constitution becomes basically like a man as well, and thereby can be killed or destroyed. And of course, that is their goal. That is what the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have been working towards achieving for the past century and a half. And it's why we warned about it, because they are accelerating their efforts. They think they see a light at the end of the tunnel, and they think that that light is their twisted goals, machinations, and agenda. But the truth of the matter is that what it is the light of liberty's lantern. It is the will of the American people getting ready to stand in fierce and staunch opposition to them. And it must be done. It must be done.
Well, there's no other choice. It has to be done. It's the way that this nation was born. Let's reflect the events of yesterday and the historical prominence of what independence day was all about.
Folks, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties here. What Jeremy was trying to talk about before he started to drop off there a little bit is the importance of the Declaration of Independence. And what's so important about what was being discussed there at that time was that our founding fathers took the unprecedented step of saying that sovereignty is not just condensed into the hands of a singular individual, that it's not just in the hands of a nobility, but it's in the hands of the people. And that's why, after the war was over, and we go into the Constitutional Convention, you go to the preamble of the Constitution and you see that the opening lines to it are, "We the people do ordain and establish." What does that mean? That means that we are the ones that created this government. That means that all power and authority that has been handed to the government has been delegated by we the people. That means that we also have the power and the authority to take it away when they breach that greatest of social compacts or contracts ever devised by the hands of men, yet divinely inspired by providence above. And of course, that is none other than our shared United States Constitution. It is that important that we stay true to everything that our founding fathers sought to accomplish. And what our founders were attempting to accomplish is to ensure that the people would be able to exercise their rights, to enjoy their rights, to be free from governmental incursion, from governmental tyranny and oppression. And the only way that they could do that is to place the onus on we the people, to stand up for our rights. And that's why no one else has the ability to save this country. It's why we cannot just turn to some messianic figure to try and save us. That duty, that obligation, and the onus of that responsibility falls squarely on our shoulders. And I know that we've repeated that seemingly ad nauseum on previous episodes of The Wright Flyer, but what it comes down to is that we have to be proactive in the safeguarding and maintenance of our fundamental and inalienable rights. And so when you try to delegate that duty, to delegate that responsibility, that's when you start to run into the sorts of problems that we're seeing now. And it's not showing any signs of getting any better at any point in the foreseeable future. And unless and until we begin to truly stand up for ourselves and for our rights, and to be proactive in the maintenance and safeguarding of our fundamental and inalienable rights, then we are never going to actually be able to overcome the type of rampant corruption that is just running amok within our representative Republican form of government. And that requires that we stay true to ourselves, as we were always meant to stay true to ourselves. Jeremy, I think you're lagging just a little bit again.
Folks.
Sorry about the technical difficulties here, folks, but what we are trying to get at here is the importance of the law, and why the United States of America is a nation of laws, not of men. It's so important that we uphold our fundamental and inalienable rights because no one else can. And that's the problem that Jeremy and I have with respect to Donald Trump is he said everything's up for negotiation. But we can't negotiate our rights. We just cannot. Because the truth of the matter is that our rights were endowed to us by our Creator, the God of nature. And that would be just within everything that is part of us and what we have always been. Because when you step away from that, when you start to try and say that we are a nation of men and not of laws, then you can change the law to mean anything. And you can make it apply only to a select few. And that just cannot work.
That's absolutely right, Randy. Now, folks, I had to take a different venue here. I'm actually kind of out on our wings, maintaining some stuff we got going on with our technical difficulties. I apologize about this. Basically, before I got ejected, what I was referring to, going back to, again, harking on Independence Day and whatnot, there's a burning desire by our founding fathers and the colonials to where we took on the world's superpower and pretty much told them, you're not going to do this to us anymore. We've had enough. If you're going to do this, you're going to do that, you're going to come in, pillage and plunder our villages, our towns, take our property from us, deprive us of the means of defending and protecting ourselves and our families, which was the final straw, by the way, folks, before the revolution began. They understood the word no, and they enforced it. We have gotten away from that. We need to get back to that. That has been a driving, burning, fiery desire that this nation is built on. That is the spark, that is the burning ember of what liberty's light is. And if we allow that to get snuffed out, then that ultimately, who does that fall on? Who's responsible for that? We the people. If we allow these individuals, like Hillary Clinton and her Fabian troglodytes, or Trumpolini and his Quaff Commandos, or anybody else, you have Comey, the McComb-over wannabe, to do these things, strip us of our equal protection under the laws, strip us of our due process. See, folks, what we the people need to understand and build on is when it comes to equal protection clauses of the Constitution, it directly correlates and ties into due process. Because, again, due process has to be, true due process is from beginning to end until, again, the crime is committed, until that individual is off paper. But it's not just due process against an individual that is the charge of the crime. What about the due process of the individuals that were damaged or injured? Because now you're depriving them of that. That's where the equal protection of the law comes in. It plays both sides. It has to.
Right.
Because if it doesn't, we've all seen the depiction of Lady Justice wearing a blindfold and holding a set of balance scales.
Mm-hmm.
That means that the law applies to the criminal activity as well as those that are victimized.
Right.
And it has to be done in such a way to where it's equal across the board. You have to have true justice of the law being followed so that those individuals that are damaged or injured, they get true justice because the law is followed and applied and such. But also, the criminal also receives true justice because the law is not skirted to allow them to go unpunished.
Right, and that's why Themis holds in her other hand the sword of justice. That's all about being able to strike down those who would deprive the rights of others, those who would attack the fundamental and inalienable rights of others, and to go against the law. And that is a major aspect of the symbolism that just represents our entire justice system. And what we saw happen today was making a mockery of that. It was attacking that. It was purposefully tearing asunder this whole notion of equal protection under the law. And when we go down that path, it opens up a dangerous, slippery slope that cannot be avoided. Because what is happening is we are seeing the very social foundation of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours begin to disintegrate before our very eyes. And of course, that's exactly by design. That's what the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialists want to achieve and want to accomplish, and what they have been working towards for this past century and a half. But when you take into consideration everything that makes this country work, and everything that is the embodiment of the national character, heritage, spirit, but above all, identity of the American people, you see that when you take away one of the fundamental pillars of our society, then you open us up to exposure, to have these twisted Fabian socialist forces redefine us as to who we are. And remember that Barack Hussein Obama, back when he was running for the presidency in the first time in 2008, essentially went before the cameras of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and said that we are 5 minutes away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America. And it can't work.
And when you look at this, let's throw in this attack on the Second Amendment with this and tie it directly to Lady Justice. Okay. That sword that she holds in her right hand, very symbolic of why she holds it in her right hand, folks. Okay? The right hand has always been synonymous with enforcement. You hear my bosses say, my right hand man. But we can even go all the way back to the natural law tenets and biblical aspects of this. Jesus Christ sits at the right hand of God.
Uh-huh.
There's a purpose why she wields that sword in her right hand. Because it is the most dominant and it is the most just. And what they're essentially doing is they're depriving Lady Justice of the right to keep and bear arms, meaning depriving justice of the ability to protect and defend our sovereign rights.
Right.
They want to strip that sword out of her hand. They want to take that scale and strip her of that. They want to tighten that blindfold, not only extend it from the eyes, but they want to be able to extend it, make it as, a plastic bag over her head, as to snuff her out completely. We cannot allow this. We have to be virtuous in this. We have to be chivalrous, act of chivalry to protect her and to protect her innocence.
And not only that, but to defend her objectivity, because the law must be, by its nature, objective. It cannot be selective. And that's part of the whole reason as to why the Equal Protection Clause, and yes, indeed, due process under the law, is such a quintessential part of who we are, both as a nation and as a people, because we had taken it a step further. The natural law was first codified in any sense of a ruling or elite nation back on the field of Runnymede in 1216 by the baronage of England and against King John I of Robin Hood fame. Yes, the Great Charter, Magna Carta. And it said the law of the land. That was where the first time we ever saw that phrase come into meaningful use, the law of the land. Well, that meant the natural law. What do we call our Constitution pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, the supreme law of the land. You see, there is this uninterrupted chain that spanned a period of 64 years from the time of the Declaration of Independence to the Constitution, that it was uninterrupted. All the way from Runnymede to that time, our founding fathers took it to its inexorable conclusion, to the open and obvious conclusion that needed to be drawn for the perfection of the supreme law of the land and of the natural law. And yes, folks, I did drop down the quality of our audio here just for a minute. It was because I'm not getting very much volume on the phone from studio mode, so I dropped us down into regular mode. So hopefully we should be able to hear everybody a little bit better that way and more equally. So bear with us as we work through these technical difficulties.
I'm looking at this as a technological besmirchment upon our due process of bringing the truth and evidence.
Our due broadcast rights.
Yeah. So, hey, it's there. We solidify it, I'm sure. Again, it's the whole point of, ultimately it comes down to we the people. If we stand by and we tolerate these injustices against our rights, because folks, let's look at this with Comey and this whole thing with Hillary, the horror ban on Clinton, and them not looking to proceed any further with the investigation or to levy charges. Where's the justice for the individuals that were killed in Benghazi? Where's the justice for their families? More so, where's the justice for the future generations of posterity of those families?
Well, I'll tell you where it is. I'll tell you exactly where it is, Jeremy. It's that they don't believe that those people have justice. Those people are just the peons. Those people are the peasants. Remember that Alexis de Tocqueville said that any flavor or form or facet of socialism is just basically New Age or neo-feudalism. And that's what it is. They're trying to create the class of nobles that can look down their, thumb their noses at the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people, and carve out a special niche for them. That is what Comey was saying today when he said, yes, the great weight of the evidence would seem to suggest this, but we are not going to go and press charges because essentially of who it is. That is violative of everything that we have. And it emphasizes everything that you were just making the point about there, that essentially what they are doing is saying that these people don't matter because they aren't Hillary.
And furthermore, what that essentially says is that they have no longer any authority whatsoever to enforce any laws. Because when you take and you split the law the way that they did today, and you're selective on who's going to be prosecuted and charged and who's not, just because of the class of that individual or group of individuals, you cannot equally provide justice and due process and equal protection of the laws and enforce that all the way across the board, which is the sole purpose of law enforcement to do. Mm-hmm. They, too, also wear a blindfold when it comes to justice, because they cannot be biased. They cannot be discriminatory. And for them to do that, they have basically surrendered and forfeited their authority as a law enforcement agency in this nation. They've become illegitimate. Now, folks will say, well, you can't say that against the FBI. There'll be black helicopters hovering over your house and people kicking in your door at 3 o'clock in the morning. Let them come. Because the truth, again, is the only thing that matters. I will never cease in stopping or never cease in speaking the truth. Period. I'm willing to accept the responsibilities for me doing so. Why? It is my constitutional right to speak these things. And because I understand it's my right and it's my obligation to maintain it, it's my obligation to be held accountable for my action. I'm perfectly willing and capable to accept those consequences. I don't have a problem with that. And I'll tell you why. Because A, I don't believe they're going to come and kick in my door. I don't think they want to take that chance of putting me up, or anybody else like me that speaks these truths. What are they going to do? Just whisk me away and make me disappear? Do you know how many questions it's going to raise? Does anybody have any idea the individuals that are going to be impacted by that and are going to say, something's not right here? We have to stop being afraid of exercising our rights in defense of our rights. We have to stop being afraid of individuals like the whore of Babylon, Hillary Clinton, because of who she is. We have to stop being afraid of certain law enforcement agencies because of who they are. I don't care who any of them are. The truth doesn't care who any of them are. The truth is absolute. It will always be, it always has been, and it will never go away. You cannot get rid of it. It will always be there. And the sooner people understand that, the better off this country is going to be, and the quicker we can get back to maintaining our sovereignty, to exercising our ultimate power of being the popular sovereigns and holding those individuals accountable. But it all begins with people being able to be willing to be held accountable themselves for their actions.
And you see, that's what the Fabian socialists are all against. That's the greatest thing that they have tried to do, is to essentially say that no one can be held accountable for anything, because they don't want that to be the case. Because then all of a sudden it means that people can be accountable by rejecting them. And that's ultimately what people who are responsible and who are accountable and who are paying attention to the arena of politics will come to the conclusion to. Because when they look at it, they see that the Fabian socialists are trying to basically engage in what would be called theft by any other name. And that's what socialism is. It is theft. It is trying to strip and deprive people of things that rightfully belong to them. And they want to make it to where it's a top-down, centralized authority. But that's so diametrically opposed to everything that we hold near and dear in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and community of popular sovereigns of ours.
It's the whole auspice of, again, going back and utilizing history as the ultimate teacher that it is. We, the people, declared our independence from such tyrannical tactics and measures. Not once but twice. On a smaller scale in 1812, the British tried to overthrow us again. They failed. They managed to burn down our Capitol, or the White House, set fire to the White House.
And the Capitol building as well. They burnt the entire city.
The Capitol building. So, okay, but you know what? They failed in their objective of breaking us. If we continue to be tolerant of individuals like Comey making these statements and not being held accountable, if we allow ourselves to continue to look to people who are sitting in seats of authority and power to represent us, and when they fail in doing that, we don't take action by holding them accountable. And I'm not talking about just the Democrats. I'm talking about the whole lot of them.
Yeah.
I've lost a tremendous amount of respect for Darrell Issa and Trey Gowdy with regards to investigations with Operation Fast and Furious, Project Gunrunner, and every other offshoot of that has come to light. They dropped the ball on it. They just said, we've exhausted this. Well, let's just, let's focus on something else. It's like they have OCD, a very, very bad case of OCD. They'll start doing one thing, and they get frustrated with it. They don't push it to the fullest extent of their capabilities because they're afraid, and then they start tackling something else. Trey Gowdy dropped the ball with regards to the investigation of Hillary Clinton. It's very simple. All he had to do was petition a federal judge to appoint a special prosecutor. Done deal. Done deal.
You know, that's all they had to do with Eric Holder, too. That's all they had to do with Eric Holder. And Darrell Issa dropped the ball.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. And see, here it is, Randy. I'm not even a licensed attorney. I haven't even began law school yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not an elected official. I'm just a simple-minded, sovereign American citizen. I understand what needed to be done.
Mm-hmm.
So when they drop the ball on this, they're not effectively representing we the people. We are a constitutional representative republic. We put them in office to do a job. They failed at that job. And when they're not held accountable for their failures, we the people need to step up and say, you're done. I don't care what party you belong to. I don't care what your political bent is. I don't care if you support the Constitution for the vast majority of the time, but when you decide that you're going to skirt just that once, you get one chance. One chance. And when you go against the grain that is solidified in natural law tenets and rooted in the Constitution, when you forego and abandon your principles, not only are you abandoning your own personal principles, but you are abandoning the principles of those that you represent.
Yeah, because it's going against the supreme law of the land. And when you go against the supreme law of the land, when you go against the fact of the people, you have no standing, you have no jurisdiction, you have no authority to stand up and have any type of authority whatsoever. And that's what's so dangerous, is we have people who actually are sitting there thinking that our Constitution is somehow going to disappear, that the American people are what, so lazy and lackadaisical at this point in our history that we would just allow that to happen? I happen to know that there are far too many individuals to allow that to happen, that would just act to prevent that from happening. And we have to be reticent. We have to be ready, willing, and able at a moment's notice to do whatever is necessary to defend the Constitution. And that is why the only thing that we are expected to swear loyalty and allegiance to in this country is the Constitution. Again, it goes back to that whole adage that the United States of America is a nation of laws, not of men. But when we start to try and say that we are a nation of men, as what we saw play out in that just twisted debacle today, that's when you can start to see tyranny, oppression, despotism, all of those sorts of totalitarian strains take root in the land of the free. And that is the last thing that we should ever allow to happen in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours. It is, the onus is on us, folks, and us alone. We can't delegate this. We can't look for some messianic figure to come tap dancing out of heaven on a quaff cloud, because it's not going to happen. It's not going to rain dandruff of gold. It just won't happen.
Right. And Randy, and folks, I have to step in and apologize here regarding some technical difficulties. I just got a message from our first Air Marshal Nelson Ward that apparently the show is just completely dropped off and has gone kaput. So we're going to continue to do what we're doing here. We're going to finish off the show, and we're going to look into the technical difficulties. Obviously, it's not on my end or on Randy's end, but apparently YouTube doesn't like hearing the truth either. So whether they've got something going on or whether there's a system problem or what have you, we're still going to finish off the show. So please bear with us. These things do happen, and we're not perfect. If we were, well, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But
it's interesting. It shows it's broadcasting on my end just fine.
Sure. So again, whatever technical difficulties, folks, we do apologize. But again, we have to persevere. We are going to be virtuous on this and vigilant, and we're going to finish out the show for you.
Yeah.
So getting back to this instance of, us negating our responsibilities and these elected officials. And again, we cannot become a nation of men. We must remain a nation of laws. Now, can we become a nation of men acting as a nation of laws? Well, sure. Otherwise, we wouldn't be a nation at all. I mean, if we didn't have individuals, sovereign individuals that understand the law, are willing to enforce the law.
Right, but it's not men who define the nation. It's the law that defines the nation. And it goes to one of the questions that I asked with respect to Donald Trump. If he finds no value in the Constitution, as he has admitted of his own fruition, and the Constitution, being the supreme law of the land, is what defines America, how can he be a nationalist? How can he be claiming to be a populist nationalist when he doesn't even abide by or find value in the very thing that defines us both as a nation and a people? That is part of the twisted machinations that makes him wholly unacceptable to me.
Well, to take that a step further, again, we've reiterated this numerous times, and it bears worth repeating.
Yeah.
If he doesn't find any value in the very thing that solidifies our authority, he doesn't find any value in we the people.
Right.
And I think he's adamantly clear about that. He, too, is just like Comey the Comb-Over, to where, well, okay, this applies to people, but, you swear allegiance to me at my rally, and I'll help you build a wall, we'll protect you, we'll do this and that, but, hey, if you disagree with me, well, I'm gonna make the recommendation that you get punched in the face and carried out on a stretcher.
And I'll pay your legal fees.
See? And pay the legal fees.
Yeah.
So he is doing the exact same thing that Comey the Comb-Over has done with regard to the whole battle on Hillary Clinton.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's totally different. This is a legal action. No. Him doing that is also a legal action. When you are getting individuals and convincing them to throw their support to you, behind you, to run for the highest office in the land. See, this is what becomes a legal act. The President of the United States is the head of the executive branch, meaning to carry out and execute all the laws that are in pursuance of the Constitution, legal laws that are made in pursuance of the Constitution, to execute those laws, to carry them out. He is wanting to hold that position. So it is absolutely a legal matter. Absolutely. And you cannot, again, tolerate the splicing and the splitting of hairs when it comes to legal minutia regarding this. Well, this is a legal issue because it's investigation and criminal activity. Well, you know what else is criminal activity? The cloth waffler trying to have a bunch of braided laced jack boots sitting there, supporting him, swearing allegiance to him, because if they're swearing allegiance to him, they forfeit and surrender and negate their allegiance to the United States Constitution. Why? Because he himself has created a title of nobility for himself.
And it's always been about him, and it's always been about his own self-aggrandizement. That's the thing about Donald Trump. For his 70 years on this planet, he has not once spent a day on this earth where he wasn't acting for his own interests and his own interests alone. That's why he wanted to abuse the takings clause and eminent domain to try and take people's property for his own benefit, when that is a complete and utter violation of the rights. Now, yes, I'm sure people are going to sit there and talk about the Kelo case or the Kello case, but you know what? The Kello case was actually violative of the Constitution. And by the way, when a court case goes forward in such a manner as to be violative of your other rights, it's violative of the Constitution, which means you have no due process. Literally, you have no due process.
That case has no standing. There's no standing for that case to have even been heard.
Right.
Just like there was no standing for the case, the Voisin case.
Yeah.
That we spoke about last week pertaining to the Second Amendment. There's no standing for that for the Supreme Court to even hear that. There's no standing for that case to even go to any court.
Exactly.
Period.
Right.
Much the same with Roe v. Wade. We can look at, we can even look at Marbury versus Madison. Randy, we can go all the way back and say that case had no standing due to the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's the courts acting in a skittish and such a way to where they're afraid of doing the right thing. And it's not just the courts. It's law enforcement agencies like the FBI.
It's all government that refuses to act upon the fundamental and inalienable rights of the people and safeguarding our fundamental and inalienable rights. When the government acts in such a way that it is taking a position that is diametrically opposed to the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people, that's when we start to have major and significant problems in this country. It's because it's working against the very design of the country. Think of the natural law as sort of like the dough upon which the pie of America is made. If you ignore that, or if you mess with the recipe of that, you can ruin the entire nation and everything that it stands for, just like you can ruin a pie. And Trump would want it to be a hair pie, but hair pie does not sound appealing because it wouldn't taste good.
Well, no, again, it's we're going to go back in history, and we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. That they are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government, law enforcement agencies are a form of government. The courts are a form of government. They're strictly attached to a set of governing rules and principles. They themselves are their own individual forms of government.
And you know, Jeremy, you mentioned something there too that goes back even further. You mentioned the consent of the governed. Where do you suppose it was that we saw that for the first time in the history of mankind?
Magna Carta.
You're absolutely right. You have to go back to 1216 at Runnymede. But it said there can be no government without consent of the governed. So you see, these doctrines are very, very ancient. They predate us. You know, they're almost 1,000 years old as codified law. But as natural law, they go even further back than that. They go back to the establishment of society in general. That's the whole thing. That's why we say that the natural law tenets that underpin our shared United States Constitution and our representative Republican form of government are by their very nature timeless. That means they're just as applicable today as they were at Runnymede, as they will be at the time of Kingdom Come.
Now, to finish this, whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Folks, that is the second paragraph, first half of the second paragraph
of the Declaration
of Independence.
Mm-hmm.
This is why yesterday was such a historical day that will always always be, should always be, must always be etched upon our hearts, in our minds, and our souls.
Because it identifies us. It identifies us as a nation and a people.
It is our birthright.
Right.
It is our birthright.
And it goes deeper than that. It goes to the very foundation of what it means to be an American. And it says that it is our duty. It's our absolute duty, obligation, and above all responsibility to proactively maintain and safeguard our fundamental and inalienable rights, because we are supposed to hand it down to the up-and-coming generations, and indeed even those generations which have yet to be born, to be able to exercise their fundamental and inalienable God-given rights with as much ease, if not even more so, expanded scope even, than we were able to. And if we drop the ball on that, if we fail to live up to that duty, obligation, and responsibility, the sands of time are going to judge us most harshly, folks. History will not be kind to us if we screw this up.
And again, this goes back to when we mentioned the family unit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And I'm going to make another analogy here pertaining to the family. Randy, you and I both have heard our parents say that they want their children to have things
better than they did.
A better life than what they did. I want the same for my kids and for my grandkids. See, it's my obligation to make it such.
Mm-hmm.
It's your obligation, Ray, when you have your children, to make it such.
Right.
It's all of our obligations to make it such. Now, this is a very touchy subject for individuals when it comes to, well, what rate do you have to talk about me and my family? Well, here's the thing. I'm not disparaging anybody's family here in the least bit. I'm simply pointing out the fact that as a parent, you will do anything and everything within your means and your authority and power to make sure that your children do not suffer. They do not come under attack. They are protected, they are safe, and they are happy. That's the whole auspices. If the people they don't have the full understanding of that, they want to say, well, my kids are safe because, I can put a bicycle helmet on them when, they're out riding their bikes. Okay, fine. It goes deeper than that. The only way that your children will ever remain safe is if you are proactive in defending your rights. Because if you don't have your rights, if you forfeit your rights and abandon your principles, you are not maintaining yourself and allowing yourself to be in that position and maintain that position to where you are going to be any good for your children or your grandchildren. That concept rolls right into law enforcement. With law enforcement officers, their number one priority is to make it home after every shift. You know why? Their safety and well-being comes first, for the simple fact that if they're not safe, then they cannot fulfill their obligations of protecting the people. And when I say protecting people in regards to protect and serve, it's not about protecting people from harm being done to them. They can't do that. It's impossible for them to do that. Are there instances where they just happen to be at the right place at the right time and intervene? Yes. But that happens to everybody. When I talk about protect and serve, and I talk about them being safe and them being able to maintain that position, I'm talking about them protecting the rights of individuals, both criminals and victims, and through due process.
And it's why they have to take it's why they have to take an oath. It's why everyone who holds any position of power or authority within this country has to take an oath. And that too is part of due process and equal protection. That's notice and a hearing. Sure. It's a notice and a hearing as to your duties and your obligations. And we we are not holding people accountable for violating their oaths of office. That, to me, is a major problem. When we are not holding people accountable for those things, we are allowing anarchy, chaos, and all of these other atrocious things to become the new norm. We are essentially allowing the destruction and the decay and the entropy against our country to set into effect and to fundamentally transform us into a way that we were never intended to go, into a direction that we were never intended to travel. And the fact that people are not taking this seriously, and the fact that people will sit there and say that because it's how it applies now, that's how we have to argue it, they're missing the bigger point. They're missing the bigger point of, if you try and change it to the way that it's just applied now, which is not even a full application, that means you're trying to pick and choose which laws apply or don't. Selective enforcement of the law does not work. It devalues the law. It diminishes it. It strips it of its teeth and authority. And the minute that we allow that to happen in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic, which it is happening right now, that is the minute that we will be inexorably placed on the path to revolution.
Now, people want to talk about, they always bring up, well, it's discrimination. The cops are discriminatory against this, and the lawmakers are discriminatory against that and everything else. Here's the thing. The true discrimination comes in when those individuals make that selective process to apply it for this group of individuals or individual, but not this other individual. Again, Comey the comb-over is a prime example of this. He's allowing Hillary or Babylon Clinton to get away with literally with murder and treason. And absolute treason.
Yeah.
Because he does not want to do his job. He does not want to hold her accountable because he's not willing to be held accountable himself. Well, guess what, Mr. Comey? Little Comey McComb-over, you are going to be held accountable. You are going to be judged, as Randy said, by the sands of history and time, and they are not going to be pleasant with you.
No. We are not going to treat you with kid gloves, because then we would be derelict in our own duty of standing up for what is right and important in this nation and to our progeny. That is the aspect of it all that they just want to sweep under the rug. It's what so many people, it's too hard. We can't discuss it that way, or we can't be held accountable or responsible because we didn't have any control over it. Well, bovine excrement. He's had plenty of opportunity to investigate this, and yes, there is evidence there, and we already see that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialists and their lapdogs in the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media are trying to say that this is just proof that there was never any evidence of any wrongdoing on the part of Hillary. No, that is not what was shown here. What was shown here is that rank and rampant corruption is just running like wildfire in the auspices of our government. That we, the people, through our own complacency, have allowed this to come to fruition. Folks, if you want someone to blame for this, I hate to say this, but it's my fault, it's Jeremy's fault, it's Nelson's fault, and it's your fault. It's all of us in our capacity as popular sovereigns' faults for not being able to hold this government accountable. Now, I'm not saying that to disparage us, because yes, there are those of us who are taking the stance. But if this is where the collectivist thing really does come into play, because it is in our capacity as popular sovereigns, meaning as citizens, all of us equally are responsible. It's like a military unit in that respect.
Absolutely. Well, I call it the private pile effect.
Yeah.
From the movie Full Metal Jacket, he smuggled the donut into the barracks in his footlocker, and guess what? Nobody in his unit stopped him from doing it. They allowed him to do it. Well, guess what? He's the one who committed the crime. He got the relish in and enjoying and eating that donut. Everybody else paid the price. Well, guess what? What people forget what happened after the fact, he got what was known as a soap party. Since they had to feel the sting of that, they had to feel the pain of doing PT there in the barracks, and they had to go through the suffering of undue exercise and stress and painful anguish. They exacted justice. But the thing is, they paid the price for their own dereliction in duty by failing to stop him, failing to do what needed to be done to keep him in check.
Right.
He didn't understand that. He knew what he did was wrong, but he didn't care. And he stood there and ate the donut anyway, and he savored every delectable morsel of that fried dough to the detriment that befell him later on.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is what needs to happen. And unfortunately, Randy, we are not at that point yet, sadly. We should have been, our founding fathers and our ancestors in this country would have been at that point
already,
at the drop of a hat.
Yeah.
10 times over. 10 times over. And see, this is why we rail against moral relativism. We rail against revisionist history. We rail against indoctrination of youth. And we declare war on political correctness. Because I want people to get to that point. I want them to get to that point on their own accord rather than them having to be forced into it and feeling the pain.
Mm-hmm.
Folks, we are looking at a huge spanking coming down on this nation very, very soon.
Yeah. And at this point, it's unavoidable.
Painful.
At this point, it's unavoidable.
It is unavoidable. We need to brace ourselves for it. We need to hold each other accountable because it's coming to happen. It's going to come to fruition. More so, we need to be accepting of that responsibility and the punishment that is due us because of our dereliction in duty.
Yeah.
And again, like Randy said, we're not trying to, demonize anybody or, vilify anybody for this. This is the simple truth. This is reality.
Mm-hmm.
We have to look at this with a realistic mindset. We, the people, have allowed this to happen. We've skirted our responsibilities and obligations. We, the people who have given consent to be governed, have lost sight of that. And it goes against everything that Benjamin Franklin warned us about. Our liberties and freedoms and securities or safeties have been given up so that we can feel safe, so that we have this modicum of security, this false sense of security. We fell into that trap. He warned us about it. All of our founding fathers warned us about it.
Yeah.
Now, we have to pay the consequences, and we have to do so. We have to grin and bear it. We have to do it because that's the only way that we are going to learn and we're going to continue to thrive as this great republic that we are. If we fail to do that, if we do not accept responsibility for this, then all is lost.
Yeah.
And that's the sad truth of it.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to just lay down and give up. I'm not willing to stop this. I'm willing to accept responsibility for my actions.
Right.
As is Randy.
Right. And that's why we come on and do these shows. We do this to empower you. We do this to give you the tools necessary to wrest back control away from those frothing at the mouth Fabian socialists that are trying to kill and destroy us. And make no mistake about it, folks, that is absolutely what they are dedicated to. That's what they have been working towards relentlessly, meticulously for the past century and a half. And it is why it is our duty, obligation, and above all responsibility to come together and foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared Constitution, but also our fundamental and inalienable rights. The sooner we do that, the sooner we will be able to come out and rebut these attempts to destroy our nation. The sooner that we will be able to take power back from those nefarious forces that have been seeking to strip and deprive it from us for all of this time. But folks, we have to do it together as a nation, as Jeremy was mentioning there. And that means that the onus and obligation, and responsibility and duty, and yes, even fault is shared. But we can and we will overcome these forces that are trying to destroy us. That it is predestined because truth is on our side, but we cannot expect instant gratification. So we start on that long, drawn-out journey right here tonight as constitutional compositionists to reclaim our nation. Now, with that said, it is time to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Folks, if you see her fall out of the plane, it's because of all of the technical difficulties we've had. Point and laugh as she falls. As always, folks, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I've been joined by my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton. We want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. We invite you to leave any questions, comments, or concerns you may have either here on our YouTube page or our Google Plus page or our Facebook page. And on top of that, we invite you to follow us on Twitter with the Twitter handle @RadioAviationEX. One more time, folks, that's @RadioAviationEX. And there you will find our departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, our Blogspot page. And by the way, folks, I did post an audio blog earlier today, so go ahead and do check that out. It's very interesting, very similar to the topic that we covered here on tonight's program. And then there's the Cafe Press account. Tell them a little bit about that.
Well, the Cafe Press account, I guess, given the technical difficulties that we have, I'm willing to bet that it would be okay to venture on there and peruse some of the novelties and products that we have there. Maybe our stewardess and flight attendant could assist anybody with that. Maybe, I don't know, in spirit anyways.
Yeah, seeing as she fell out.
Yeah, well, hey, it is what it is, I suppose. But,
yeah.
Folks, go ahead and show your support for, not only the show. You don't have to, do it just for us. Do it for yourselves. Do it for your friends and families.
Yeah.
Show your support as being a first-class passenger, or even more so, an ultimate wielder of sovereignty.
That's all we ask,
here in
folks.
The United States and our republic. So
let
folks understand and let them know. Go tell it on the mountain, whatever you have to do.
But don't do it off key, because that'd be bad.
Take advantage of it and let folks understand.
Right.
And let them know that you are willing to accept responsibility and in the maintenance and the obligations of our birthright as the ultimate wielders of sovereignty.
All right, folks. Thank you again. We'll see you next time. Do take care.